Chapter 14. The Taker of Care. As January went on, Billy spent more and more time with Mary, Hilda, and Murph. "We're like a crime-fighting team," enthused Hilda once, but she fell silent as the other three looked at her with eyes that asked, "Seriously?" But no sooner had Murph's life at school started to seem like something he might be able to cope with, out of nowhere, the rug was not only pulled from beneath his feet, but yanked, thrown into the corner, and set fire to. And guess who was standing there holding the matches? Correct. Once again, it was the bristling, shouty Mr. Flash bearing the bad news. A couple of weeks after the Great Tomato Sauce incident, Murph and Billy had wandered to the library to avoid going outside into the raw January weather. It was a large, comfortable room with a calm atmosphere that was only rarely interrupted by a gentle boop as the librarian, Mrs. Fletcher, checked out books with her computer. "I wonder what her cape is," Murph found himself thinking as they settled into two comfy chairs near the window. Idly, he imagined Mrs. Fletcher firing flames out of her hands or leaping tall buildings with her pleated, plum-coloured skirt flapping in the breeze. It crossed his mind that her glasses, which were fastened around her neck on a delicate metal chain, could actually be very useful in a rescue situation. You'd never lose them, he thought, and you could also use the loop as a lasso to hook in the baddie. Murph's imagination, as ever, was getting the better of him. Ironically, he was only minutes away from finding out what Mrs. Fletcher's capability actually was, when Mr. Flash barged into the library like a wrecking ball. "Cooper!" he barked, looking around like an angry lighthouse. Mrs. Fletcher bristled. "Shh!" she hissed sharply. Mr. Flash tried again. "Cooper!" he husked in one of the loudest whispers ever recorded. "Oh no," whined Billy, sliding down behind his chair. "He's gonna shout at us. He's still angry about getting covered in sauce." But it wasn't sauce that Mr. Flash had come to discuss. He spotted Murph in his seat beside the window and strode over, his huge boots clonking on the floor. Mrs. Fletcher went bright pink and made another angry shushing noise. "Shh! Cooper," began Mr. Flash in an even more strangled voice. "I have some news for you. Now I've got to start preparing the class for their PCAT. Obviously, there's not much point in you being in my lessons." "Oh, great," thought Murph. "This is where he tells me I can hang out in the library for an hour every morning." "But you're not going to be hanging about in the library every morning," roared Mr. Flash unhelpfully. Behind him, Mrs. Fletcher got up from her librarian's chair, looking furious and shushing like a nearly boiled kettle. "Shh! You're going to be helping out Carl while the rest of us have CT." Mr. Flash looked like he was enjoying himself enormously. "The caretaker?" asked Murph blankly. "That's right. You'll be the right-hand man's right-hand man," Mr. Flash went on. "So, in the morning, you head to Carl's and see what you can help out with, and leave the rest of us to get on with some work. All right?" Mr. Flash had gradually become aware that someone was standing right beside him, breathing heavily. Nervously, he turned his head and found himself staring into the furious eyes of Mrs. Fletcher. "This is a library," she began angrily, "and I said shush! So would you please shush?" "All right, Mrs. Mouse. Just giving Cooper here some good news. Keep your knickers on." "I beg your pardon," began Mrs. Fletcher. "You heard. Don't get your hair in a twist. It's too quiet in here anyway." At this point, Mrs. Fletcher lost her temper. And this is where Murph found out what her capability was, because when Mrs. Fletcher boils over, her head transforms into a very large foghorn. And you know what noise a very large foghorn makes. Went Mrs. Fletcher's foghorn head directly into Mr. Flash's face, and then again, twice more. After the three blasts, the entire library was silent from shock and awe. Mr. Flash looked rather dazed and rather windswept. He reached up and wiped some librarian spit off his face, adjusted his moustache, and quietly walked off. Mrs. Fletcher's head transformed back into a normal-sized librarian head, and she sat down as if nothing had happened. The following morning, instead of heading to CT, Murph trudged off to begin his glamorous role as caretaker's assistant. After Mr. Flash had left the library, Billy had informed Murph that Carl had a workshop on the edge of the woods at the back of the school grounds. As Murph crossed the playing fields, he realized for the first time how large and cleverly laid out the grounds of the school were. The green fields behind the main buildings were almost totally secluded, with high wooden fences stretching into the distance and only a few treetops visible beyond. The school was on the edge of a steep ridge, he worked out, and because the ground dropped away so sharply, the whole place was practically invisible. Perched on the edge of a slope near the trees was a collection of wooden buildings that, as Murph approached, he saw was bigger than it looked from a distance. Carl's workshops tumbled down the first part of the slope on a cleverly stepped series of platforms. It was as if a building had been pushed off the edge of the hill and come to rest mid-collapse. There were extremely large double doors to the left, securely padlocked, that seemed to lead into a garage of some kind. To the right was a smaller door which looked like the main entrance. There were large flower pots on either side of it, although at this time of year they contained nothing but brown earth and the remains of the morning frost on top. And pinned up just beside the door was a small, grubby piece of card with the words, "Fortress of Solitude," written in small, neat, curly handwriting. Next to them, in a different pen, someone else had drawn a smiley face. Murph screwed his face up into the "other people are unfathomable" expression that he was now adopting for around 67% of the school day, and knocked on the door. "Round the back," came a voice from the woods below him. Along the side of the building, Murph noticed a walkway of planks and paving slabs that led crookedly down the hill and around to the back of the buildings. He picked his way down, heading towards a large pond he could make out through the trees. Overlooking the pond was a wide decking platform supported on stilts, and Murph caught a glimpse of a wisp of greyish smoke rising from it. The smoke was emerging from a short wooden pipe stuck into the underside of a neat grey moustache. Above the moustache was a checked brown cap, and in between the two of them was a pair of shrewd eyes. Two muddy leather boots finished off this whole arrangement, stretched out comfortably in front of an old-fashioned deck chair. "Good normal," he said, drawing the words out speculatively and gazing at Murph through the cloud of smoke that came with them. Murph realized that though he had seen the caretaker zipping around the school plenty of times, he'd only once actually heard him speak before. His voice had a reassuring, old man husk to it, but it was deeper and more confident than he'd been expecting. Murph half raised a hand in a nervy wave. "Mr. Flash said I should come and help you out," he explained. "I'm off CT because I don't, He trailed off. "Because you don't have a cape," the caretaker finished for him. "Because Jeffrey Superman signed you up to the school thinking you were a skimmer, and now he's too embarrassed to admit he's made a massive mistake." That about sums it up, thought Murph, signifying this by raising his eyebrows slightly and puffing out his cheeks. "I'm Carl Walden. Pleased to meet you. Well, what can you do then, Kid Normal? Can you hold a brush?" Murph bristled. "Of course I can hold a brush. Holding a brush isn't a superpower. Sorry, a capability. Who would watch a film about the adventures of the amazing Captain Brush?" "Who would watch a film about a perfectly ordinary kid?" countered Carl, which was unanswerable. Murph did not answer, proving this to be true. "Right then, Captain Brush," continued the caretaker. "Time to put your amazing powers into action. The school is under threat. Only you can save the day. You'll find your secret weapon in the cupboard behind me." He jerked his head in the direction of a rough wooden door in the back wall of the outbuildings. "Sweep out the workshop for me. I'll be here if you need anything." He settled back in his chair as Murph went inside, leaving Carl to gaze out over the calm waters of the pond in the woods. It was warm inside the workshop, and it carried the reassuring smell of sawdust, glue, and paint. A long wooden bench ran along the entire length of the room on one side, and above it was a board covered with every imaginable kind of tool, all neatly arranged in special clamps or hanging from hooks. There were intriguing contraptions everywhere. Something motorbike-shaped sat in one corner, covered by a cream-coloured cloth, and weird-looking weapons lined another wall. One had a large iron grappling hook sticking out at the end. Murph found a broom and began sweeping half-heartedly, all the while taking in this mysterious place. On one shelf was a collection of angels, some made out of pottery, some wooden, some with big faces, small faces, elaborate wings, and broken wings. A series of metal clamps ran along the edge of the main workbench, one of which Carl seemed to have been using recently. There was a small pile of metal shavings on the floor underneath, and a selection of tools strewn across the worktop nearby. Held in the clamp was a metal wristwatch. Murph swept his way in that direction to get a better look. The watch had a lot of buttons, and he wondered what they could all possibly be for. Unable to resist the urge to find out, he touched one tentatively. Maybe it was one of those watches that could change the channel on the TV. A jet of flame shot out of the side of the watch and singed a nearby pot plant. Safe to say it isn't one of those TV remote watches, thought Murph, dashing over and furiously trying to pat out the smouldering begonia. "Everything all right in there, Captain Brush?" came Carl's voice from outside. "Yep, absolutely, just brooming away," lied Murph as a burning leaf drifted delicately to the floor. As he was dusting the ash from the workbench, his attention was caught by something even more interesting than a flamethrower watch. Tucked away behind the plant was a wooden box full of photographs with its lid half off. Murph took a closer look and saw a face he recognized. He carefully slid the photo out, trying not to disturb the stack or start any more fires. It was a large black and white image of two men with their arms around each other and their thumbs up. One of the men was Mr. Superman, dressed in the red costume Murph now knew belonged to his alter ego, Captain Alpha. The other man, he realized with a thrill, was a much younger Carl, with no moustache but still dressed in the same clothes and wearing his distinctive checked cap. Both men were smiling, standing in front of a car with a long bonnet which was dented and scorched. But as Murph peered at it, trying to make out more details, he heard the door handle behind him turn. In the nick of time, he stuffed the photograph back into the stack, on top of a picture of a smiling girl with long silvery hair, and grabbed his broom just as Carl appeared in the doorway. "Cup of tea, Captain?" the caretaker asked. Murph composed himself, but found his voice coming out higher than usual, the universal indicator of guilt. "Yes, please." "Right you are," replied Carl. "Try not to start any more fires while I get the kettle on, eh? There's a good kid."